Welcome to Crosspoint.
Welcome to Crosspoint.
Welcome to Crosspoint.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition.
It's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
What child is this who lay to rest on Mary's lap is sleeping, whom angels greet with anthems sweet, while shepherds watch are keeping? This is Christ the King, whom shepherds guard and angels sing. Haste, haste to bring him, Lord, the babe, the Son of Mary. So bring him incense, gold, and myrrh. Come, peasant king, to own him. The King of kings salvation brings. Let loving hearts enthrone him. Raise, raise a song on high. The Virgin sings her lullaby. Joy, joy, for Christ is born, the babe, the Son of Mary. This is Christ the King, whom shepherds guard and angels sing. Haste, haste to bring him, Lord, the babe, the Son of Mary. The babe, the Son of Mary.
Hi everybody. I have several important announcements this morning, because why in the world would I waste your time with unimportant announcements? So buckle up, there will be a test. First, it's important to remind ourselves that there are a lot of ways that we work together in this church, and our finances rank high among those ways. Not only does it keep the day-to-day and the staff going as they always have, but it quite literally keeps people under roof, keeps food on tables, keeps insurance payments and bills paid, and so much more. So you can go to crosspoint.org/contribute to find out the several simple ways that you can help fund how this community gets to serve every day of the week. And if you already are involved financially, well, keep up the good work. Tied to that announcement is the fact that we will not be providing a new online service next Sunday. Traditionally, the last Sunday of the year is when our staff and volunteers at Crosspoint take a break, at least as it pertains to the Sunday morning service. So, two things here. One, there are 9 months of content on our YouTube page that you can choose from if you'd like to have a church experience next Sunday, the 27th. And it's good stuff, if we don't say so ourselves. And so you'll have some options, despite there not being any new virtual gathering next weekend. But two, even though we're not having a new virtual gathering, our financial contributions are still important to the work that goes beyond what happens on Sunday morning. So keep that in mind next week as you go to, once again, crosspoint.org/contribute and consider your end-of-year financial participation at Crosspoint, whatever that might be. Next, if you didn't get a chance to come to Crosspoint's campus last night, you can still come tonight between 3 and 5. And make sure that you do if you're a local part of this community. It's a drive-through event, and so it's completely compliant with COVID restrictions. And it's how you pick up some very important takeaways that are tied to our Christmas service on Christmas Eve at 11 a.m., which we've been working on diligently for weeks, and I can't wait for you to experience. So you don't want to not have your takeaways that we're handing out tonight from 3 to 5. And not only are those takeaways important, but there's also something for children to pick up as well. And there's going to be an opportunity for really nice family Christmas photos too. So, run a comb through your hair and choose your sweater wisely if you're going to get a photo while you're there tonight. Oh, and also tonight between 3 and 5 is the continuation of Christmas Adventure, where families are going to receive an instruction guide, and there's multiple stops to experience the joy of Advent together as families. So each stop is less than 4 miles from Crosspoint's campus and can be made in any order that you want. Should be a lot of fun. Also, speaking of young people and fun, middle and high school groups are meeting today for their Christmas celebration. So make sure you check your email from your leaders for details on the meeting and all the important information that you're going to need for the event to go well and for it to be a great time. And then finally, I want to, on behalf of the leadership of the church and so many others, give a huge thank you to all those who purchased and donated gifts for local families in need this season as we partnered with White Oak. You all are amazing. And I don't mean that in a patronizing way. I'm saying you all amazed a lot of people the way you came through for families this Christmas. There were over 700 gifts donated, which equates to like 55 families being given not only what they asked for, and not only in many cases more than they asked for, but they were also given a reminder that they matter. They matter to other people. They're loved very non-theoretically, and that's so important. And on top of that, you gave another 50-some gift cards from local restaurants to foster families that we get to serve in the area. So dozens of children, parents all around the area have been blessed by you. And it's hard for me or any of us to find the words to capture how great we think you are. So suffice it to say, thank you. It's such an honor to do this thing with you, to do it together. So see many of you tonight at 3, and then the rest of you virtually, Christmas Eve at 11.
My soul sings out to the Lord. My heart exclaims the work of God, my deliverer. For God has seen the status of God's lowly servant, and rightly, from this time forward, all the generations will see that I was blessed. For the Great One has done magnificent things through me, and I call upon the mystery of God's name. God's mercy is for those who honor God from generation to generation. God has shown the hand of justice by scattering the proud, humbling their haughty thoughts. God has brought down the powerful from their high places and lifted up all the lowly. God has filled the hungry with God's plenty and sent away the wealthy with empty hands. God has helped God's servant, Israel, to remember God's rich mercy in accordance to the covenant made to our ancestors, to Abraham and to his children forever.
Well, friends, today we come to the last Sunday teaching of 2020. And each year, this message always carries a certain weight to it because there's this built-in sense of us closing one chapter and launching into another. And not surprisingly, I feel that similar weight today. But in this particular year of 2020, it just feels like we've added several more 45-pound plates to the bar because after all, what do you say to try to wrap up this past year of 2020 and send us forward into the next, right? What do you say? Especially something that doesn't have to have a censor bar covering it up. Because it's just been a strange year. And here we are with a couple weeks left, and we're still in the middle of a pandemic. Quarantine restrictions are getting tighter, and there's a lot of uncertainty about what the next several weeks and months hold for all of us in all sorts of different ways. And so as I wrestled with all those different tensions, I'm not sure I landed with a sermon or even a teaching for all of us today, but I do want to share some thoughts with you. And the picture I have in my mind is, let's say we're just kind of sitting in a coffee shop together, across the table from one another, masked and distanced, of course, and you ask me this one specific question. How would I then go about trying to answer it in a conversation? Because it's a question that I found myself asking a lot, but also a question that I've heard over the last several months from many of you. But before we get to the question, I want us to look at something a man named Paul writes to Jesus followers in Rome in the early first century. And he writes this to them during a very turbulent time in the history of Rome. And for early Christians, there was a lot of fear, there was a lot of uncertainty. And toward the very end of his letter, he writes this: "For everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in the Scriptures and the encouragement they provide." Now let's pause there for just a moment. Paul's saying for everything that was written in the past, and in the context here, Paul is more than likely referring to the Hebrew Scriptures, or what we call the Old Testament. He's saying everything that was written in the Hebrew Scriptures was written to teach us. But I want you to notice what he says was intended by that. So that through the endurance taught in the Scriptures. So isn't that interesting? He doesn't say, so that through the laws taught in the Scriptures, or the specific rules or commands taught in the Scriptures. Rather, he says, so that through the endurance taught in the Scriptures and the encouragement they provide. Now, that's taking a very 30,000-foot view of the Old Testament, right? He's not talking about particular verses or laws or commands. He's not talking about one particular story. Rather, he's talking about learning from the endurance of the people of God across generations for about 1,500 years that is recorded in the Hebrew Scriptures. How as a collective people, they persevered through hundreds of years of slavery. How they persevered through evil kings and empires. How they persevered through attacks and famines and genocide. How they endured through long periods of doubt and feelings of abandonment from God, and how they walked through generations of people missing the point and interpreting God in all sorts of toxic ways. And yet somehow, some way, they found a way to keep putting one foot in front of the other. They found a way to endure, to keep wrestling and seeking. And so Paul writes, for everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in the Scriptures and the encouragement they provide, we might have hope. That these stories that include both the good and the bad, the mundane, the tragic, that include both the celebrations and the desperate cries for help, through all of those, Paul says, this was written so that we might have hope. Now, for many of us, that may be a new filter through which to approach the Bible, which ironically is apparently a very biblical way to approach the Scriptures, according to Paul, where you're not having to pick apart every word and verse with all sorts of intense scrutiny, but that you can also look at the bigger story being told of people journeying with God over 1,500 years, trying to figure life out and still finding ways to move forward when there was more than enough reasons, plenty of times to just give up. And that through engaging with these stories, we might have hope. And I think for so many of us, that's what we're asking and looking for here at the end of 2020. What can I do so that I might have some hope moving forward? That's the question, right? What can I do to not just wait around for hope to show up, but that instead, what can I do to actually generate hope? Because I don't want to be angry all the time. I don't want to be cynical. I don't want to be that way. I want to be hopeful, but I don't really know how to do that in a way that feels solid and honest, rather than some naive form of imagination that has to turn a blind eye to the way things actually are. And so with the remainder of our time today, that's what I want to try to do. I want to try to answer that question in at least a few small ways. We've been in this series, Born to Live, Born to Die, and Born to Live, and how that's a pattern that we're all going through. And we've been talking about that the entire world constantly goes through this pattern of live, die, live. That life, death, resurrection, construction, deconstruction, new construction, however you want to call it, this is the pattern of our world. And so when it feels like a lot of our hope has been suffocated and beat up, and we need it resurrected, how can you and I do that? So obviously over the next year, week after week, we're going to continue to gather together and engage with these ancient stories from thousands of years ago in the Scriptures, and we're going to find our own stories in those stories. But again, the picture I have in my head today is just us sitting in a coffee shop, just kind of having a chat about what each of us can do starting right now to try to generate some more hope. And so maybe you'll take some time and just imagine yourself writing maybe some of these thoughts down on a napkin, and that we would write these ideas down with one another, maybe write them on a piece of paper, maybe type them into your phone or computer, because I really do think they can be helpful and they can give us some traction heading into the new year. So here's the first one. Let's be reminded of the evidence from this pandemic that great change is possible. With everything that's happened this past year, what we can't miss in the midst of all the difficulty is that human beings on a massive global scale changed their behavior pretty much overnight in response to the pandemic. The ways we worked, the ways we did school, gathered as a church, started wearing masks, started distancing, figuring out how to quarantine, all over the world, massive behavioral change happened. But what can end up taking up a lot of our headspace is the kind of hypercritical view of humanity. And the people around us that are resistant to new ideas, they're the ones that we get consumed with. And because of who some include or who they don't include or how they vote, we start to become ticked off at everyone and cynical about the whole world. But the reality is, massive amounts of behavioral change happened literally overnight. I mean, think back to March, 9 months ago. It felt like in about 24 hours that the NBA shut down, and then Tom Hanks got COVID, and suddenly it all became very real for everybody. And again, overnight, so many things changed. So that should generate hope in us to ask the question, well then, what else could happen? I mean, what other behaviors could possibly change? That with good information and good leadership and positive social peer pressure and the will to actually do something, what other changes could actually be possible? You see, the social change leaders that emerge in 2021 and beyond will be the ones who see a lot of hope in what we've walked through together. That will lead with the sense of, you know what, we've done this before. We've made massive changes in short amount of time. Remember when we all changed our behavior in just 24 hours? Remember that? Okay, so let's do that same thing about this over here and this thing that desperately needs to be changed. But what's also important to remember is that kind of hope, it hasn't been birthed out of this sense of, you know what, everything's fine. Why don't we just try this idea? No, that kind of hope has been birthed out of a sense of, no, everything isn't fine. It's been birthed out of pain, out of suffering, out of heartache, which is exactly why we can trust it. Because we've come by that kind of hope honestly. It wasn't something we just naively made up or imagined, but we've seen it. We've lived it. We saw people rally together in just a couple days to create new ways to make sure children that were without school meals could have food. Right? We saw tremendous amounts of sacrifice and courage and acts of love from healthcare workers and their families, teachers, and from millions of people that didn't have a title that just wanted to help. And we saw massive change happen instantaneously. It wasn't some hopeful fairy tale. It was a fact that we observed through the pain and the suffering. And that, friends, when we remind ourselves of that, it should generate some hope in us for the future about what other changes could actually be possible. Now, second thing I think that we can all do that's helpful in generating hope is to pass on good news whenever you find it. Now, this one doesn't need much explanation, obviously, but man, it does make a huge difference. A couple months ago, a father came over to a few of us at a funeral for his adult daughter. And even in the middle of his own grief, he took time to share about the difference the Crosspoint community, all of you, had made in his daughter's life. And how that in turn brought a lot of healing and reconciliation to their own father-daughter relationship. And he was expressing his immense gratitude. And I stood there thinking about how grateful I am. How grateful I am for all of you and what we do together, because I couldn't imagine still being estranged from your own kid while having to attend their funeral. I just couldn't imagine that. And I came home and I told my wife, you know, I think that 1 3-minute conversation probably renewed my hope in what we're doing together and probably tacked some more years onto my ability to keep going. Because that's just what good news does, right? And you have to discipline yourself to look for it because we have to be reminded it's out there. It doesn't mean that there's not heartbreak and suffering as well, because of course there is. But too many times we find ourselves consumed with just all that's not going well. And we can't see any good. It's one of the main reasons we start off every Monday morning staff meeting at Crosspoint with asking people to share stories of good news. And the meeting starts the same way every week, because I want all of us trying to discipline ourselves leading up to that meeting to look for good news, to recognize it when we see it, and to practice passing it on, because again, it generates hope. And we all need that. Third suggestion that I'll offer you in our collective practice of hope: change your mind about something. Because when you think about it, that's what we want other people to do, right? That whole thing that Jesus says that sums up everything: treat others the way you want to be treated. So do that. Change your mind about something. Find out more about something that, for whatever reason, you feel strongly about, but you don't actually have much evidence as to why. So read someone else's news source. Perhaps even harder, listen to someone else's news source. Take some time and intentionally make a list of things you've already changed your mind about in your life so far. Take the time, make a list, so that you won't be scared about writing down the next thing, whatever it is, that you can look back on your life and see how many things you've changed your mind about. But if hope is at least in part about seeing change happen in people, then we have to be willing to practice that ourselves. So, change your mind about something. See what it does to generate hope in you. Here's another. Create or participate in rituals that remind you of important truths. One of the lasting images from this past year were all the videos of people night after night applauding healthcare workers as they came in and out of hospitals. And this daily ritual developed rather organically, and it spread around the world, but it was this celebration of personal sacrifice and dedication and courage and putting others' needs ahead of our own. The same could be said of the peaceful protests night after night, week after week around our nation and globe, with people coming together declaring the need for justice, for racial equality, that Black lives matter, and for the dismantling of systemic racism. Others of you developed rituals just in your day-to-day life, or maybe you paused on a regular basis to watch a movie, or you made it a ritual to play games, or you took walks on a regular basis, or you scheduled intentional, consistent conversations with people. And we created these types of rituals to remind ourselves that this particular moment matters, that we're here for one another, that there's an inherent goodness to being human. And that's what rituals do. They take something that's good and they create an action around it. So it will remind us of a critical truth. And the hope is that that particular act, that particular action will speak to the potential of every action. Because understand, because this is really important, a ritual isn't about what you're doing. It's about how it awakens you. It's this sense of, if it's possible here in this moment, then certainly it's possible in other moments as well. I mean, think about the ritual of a communion meal. A communion meal that Jesus' followers share, where for thousands of years, people have taken some kind of bread and wine or juice, and they've shared them together in a simple meal to remind us of things like what sacrificial love looks like, to remind us of the sacredness and value of all life, and what it looks like to circulate grace in the world rather than more violence. But for many Christians, what's happened to communion in the church is it's become this thing where it's approached like, okay, you know what? I need to go do this thing at this time, at this place, and I need to have the experience of communion. I need to show up for communion. What happens is that the ritual itself somehow has become the point. Rather than, okay, I need to go have the experience of having my eyes and heart opened to the experience of being reminded what sacrificial love looks like. To be reminded of the sacredness of everyone in all the different areas of my life and to see them how Christ sees them. I need to go for that experience. You see, that's communion. The ritual itself isn't the point, but we create rituals that help wake us up and remind us of critically important truths so that we can carry those realities into our day-to-day lives. So just as we've done this past year, as we've learned to create rituals to celebrate the best qualities among ourselves, like courage and self-sacrifice, when we would applaud for healthcare workers in and out of hospitals, that we would applaud these great qualities that make up the best of us, and that we would declare equality and the need for justice with these peaceful protests, and to pause and be still and enjoy the moment in front of us, maybe with a walk or a glass of wine on the back porch. So in the same way, we need to keep finding ways to create and participate in rituals that remind us of the things that we want to make sure that we don't forget when life gets challenging. Okay, here's another one to try. Rather than fixate on certain outcomes, focus on learning to pivot and adapt. This is really important. And I find myself having the same conversation with lots of different people, that there is something in us that just wants us to get to the old normal, right? We just want to get back to the old normal. Or even we talk about, we just need to get and fast forward through this thing to get to the new normal. We just want to know what to expect, right? We want things to be predictable because so much of life has been turned upside down lately. But here's the thing. There is no going back to the old normal. And frankly, there isn't a new normal coming either. Instead, what's normal is disruption. What's normal is that things change. And so rather than becoming fixated on a certain outcome, like, well, you know what, I don't know what I'm going to do if this happens. Or, you know what, I don't know how I can succeed or be happy if this doesn't happen. Or if this happens, you know what, I'm just done. I'm just going to give up. Rather, what we have to learn is how to adapt. That's the skill we need to develop. We need to learn how to pivot how to flex. We're in a world that is perhaps changing faster than it ever has before, and we have to learn how to move forward in the world that actually exists now. Not a world that existed hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago, but the world that exists now. And side note, for those of us as parents, we also have to be raising kids for the world that exists now, not the world of 30 or 40 years ago, but for the world that exists now. And if we become fixated on certain outcomes as the only source of any joy and happiness in our lives, it's impossible to have any real and honest hope moving forward. But when we reflect back on the past year and all the hopes and plans that got dashed, the graduations and the sports seasons and championships and the job security and the income and the travel plans and the recitals and the plays and the weddings and the summer camps and the retreats and time with friends and all that blew up. Absolutely, it's important and necessary to grieve and mourn those things, because those losses are real and they're significant. And I have shed my own share of tears and grief over this past year multiple times. But what we've also learned is that we can adapt. We can pivot. We can find a way forward. And I think the people that are able to lead and move courageously into the future with an honest hope, with a hope that's earned some scars along the way, are the ones who have learned to adapt when things don't go as planned, rather than fixating on only one outcome. So, 2 more suggestions before we wrap up. 1, give your brain, heart, and body time to rest. Now again, this one doesn't need much explanation either, but when you consider the amount of stress and anxiety you've carried in this past year, the constant tearing down and rebuilding of expectations, the heartaches, the disappointment, the anger, the relational strains, the isolation, the scrutinizing of every single decision as you try to balance out constantly the emotional risk with the physical risk, moment by moment, for yourself, for your parents, for your kids, as you try to navigate a pandemic for the first time. Friends, understand, our brains and our bodies and our hearts are figuratively and literally tired. Now, I won't go into all the neuroscience, but our brains can actually get tired, and so rest. Make time for rest. You're not being lazy, you're being wise. You're being loving. And so find ways to give that to yourself and to give it to your friends, to give it to a spouse or a partner, give it to your kids, to your employees. Find ways to give it to yourself and to others, because it's necessary. It's nearly impossible to generate hope when you're exhausted. So if you want to fuel more hope in your life, make sure to pause in some sort of consistent rhythm and take out time to rest. And then lastly, one more reminder. Honest hope requires actual participation. Here's the thing, friends. Sending links on Facebook or Twitter doesn't generate hope. The fantasy of the internet is that spouting off about how things should get done is actually doing something. But we know it's not. Rather, we need that energy converted into actual participation. As one of my favorite authors, Barbara Brown Taylor, says, we need hope that has cleats, not ruby slippers. And so find ways to roll up your sleeves and participate in the good you want to see in the world. Whether that's getting involved in the systems that organize how we do life together at a town level, a city, state, or national level, whether it's you putting your money where your heart is and funding more of the good that you want to see happen in the world, whether it's you showing up and being present in someone's life that needs it, whether it's recognizing a problem that's happening in our world and putting your sweat equity and your skill set and gifts to work to be part of the solution, or whether it's simply seeing something that needs to get done and doing it. Honest hope requires actual participation. Cynicism, though, keeps us all in some kind of constant loop of non-action. It's that attitude of, well, you know what, it doesn't really matter if I get involved or not. I mean, what difference is it going to make? It doesn't really matter if I vote or not. What difference does it make? It doesn't really matter if I wear a mask or not. It's not that big of a deal. Because the truth, friends, is that it does matter. And not simply from a pure data and mathematical perspective. And that's where we see people argue with data and percentages and statistics all the time, where they're like, well, look at the number of people who recover from COVID. Let's look at that percentage. You're overblowing this whole thing. Or, me getting involved with my time or my finances, it really is not going to make that big of a dent. So you know what? Why should I even bother? Listen, what we have to embrace is that there's a truth here that extends beyond the math. That when you cast your vote in an election and you look around and you see others doing the same, when you walk into a store, I'm sure you've had this experience, and you see everyone wearing a mask and wearing it properly, when that happens, or when you find ways to serve and contribute toward what we're doing together as a church, these are all rituals that we experience where we're reminded of the truth. You know what? In that moment, we're reminded of, we're in this together. Yeah, that's right. We're all in this together. We're for each other, and we're for the good of the world. We're in this. Friends, when we participate, when we engage, it generates hope in us and in others. And it's hope we come to honestly because we leaned in, and it didn't just float around like some idea swirling in the air. Rather, it's doing the vulnerable, courageous work of putting flesh on it and making the idea tangible. And that's one of the great reminders we get by celebrating Christmas together. That God didn't try to generate hope by trying to sell the idea of love and grace while staying away at a distance. But rather, we celebrate the birth of Jesus, where God put flesh on love and grace and hope itself and lived among us. And with the birth of Jesus, God was actively declaring to the world that Caesar, that the empire that called himself the Son of God, the one who would bring peace to the world, that Caesar and the way of Caesar and that kind of kingdom, that this way of dominance and oppression wasn't actually what would bring real hope to the world, but that real hope that actually changes things, would look completely different. It would be a completely different kind of kingdom, and it would come in humility with love and grace and generosity and dignity for all people. And so when we celebrate Christmas, we celebrate a ritual that protests the systems and the structures that marginalize and hurt people. And together, we declare a better way, a better kingdom. That the way of Jesus leads to actual hope and life, not the way of Caesar, not the way of empire and dominance. And that we'll keep linking arms to live out that truth in the world. So Alistair's going to come and he's going to sing one last song for us as we close. But before he does, I just want to leave you with the benediction that Paul writes in that same 15th chapter of his letter to the Romans that we started off with at the beginning, where he writes this: May the God of hope, fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
God rest you, merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay. Remember Christ our Savior was born on Christmas Day to save us all from Satan's power when we had gone astray. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. He has come for us, this Jesus. He's the hope for all mankind. He has come for us, the Messiah, born to give us life. From God our Heavenly Father, our blessed angel came, And unto certain shepherds brought tidings of the same, how that in Bethlehem was born the Son of God by name. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. He has come for us, this Jesus. He's the hope for all mankind. He has come for us, the Messiah, born to give us life. All the angels sing hallelujah. Jesus Christ is born. All the children sing hallelujah. He is Christ the Lord. He has come for us, this Jesus. He's the hope for all mankind. He has come for us, the Messiah, born to give us life. He is born to give us life. All the angels sing hallelujah. Jesus Christ is born.
Thank you for joining us today, and welcome home. If you are in need of assistance during this crisis, please reach out at crosspoint.org/help.